What's up guys, JV2017 here, and today's video is a continuation of my review for the AUTOMATRON DLC from last week. And I've left a link in the description if you want more of an opinion on how I felt about the new content. I suggest you watch that video. In this video, I'm going to talk about the value and whether AUTOMATRON is worth your money. And this conversation was inspired by a lot of the comments on my review talking about the value of this content, but also because I saw some people wanted a spoiler-free review. So this video is also a no spoiler review of AUTOMATRON. Before we begin, I want to point out that value, whether something is worth your money or not, is a subjective subject. What's not subjective is the $10 price tag, or your regional equivalent wherever you live, to buy this DLC. That's the extrinsic value. You don't control that. That doesn't change unless there's a price drop. However, on the flip side, my $10 US may not be the same as someone else's $10 US because we all have different perceptions of how valuable our money is for what we want to buy. We all have different amounts of discretionary income that can be spent on games. That's the intrinsic value I'm going to be talking about today. So, with all of that being said, do I believe that the AUTOMATRON DLC is worth the $10 standalone price for my money and my perception of intrinsic value? Yes, absolutely. Something I touched on in my AUTOMATRON review is how much time you can squeeze out of this new content, and I spent 2.5 hours-ish blazing through the AUTOMATRON storyline with the Mechanist, which in my opinion had some nice dungeons, but the ending disappointed me. I invested those 2.5 hours, and I wasn't really happy with the ending, but I enjoyed what I played along the way, so I didn't feel like I got burned. And then I spent the rest of my time testing robot companion combinations and using my iBot pod to track down and collect items. So I probably spent around 15 hours with the new content, and overall I've enjoyed my time with all the new robots and the new weapons, the overall tone of this DLC. Granted, I can probably squeeze more time out of this content because I make videos for the game, but I still think that the average person who's willing to explore all that this DLC offers can get a good 10 hours of time out of AUTOMATRON that you can enjoy. And if you can't do that, which involves really exploring the robot workbench and all, then it may be difficult for you to understand why this DLC is worth $10. Let's say, for example, if you were looking for $10 worth of genuine, solid, story-based questing content, that's all you wanted, and not the ability to build robot companions, that's not something you're really interested in, then I can certainly see why this DLC isn't worth $10 to you. And I can't speak for everyone, but it used to be for me that if I could get 10 hours of enjoyment out of a single player game, just a single player game, then it was worth the full retail price of $60 to me. For example, like a God of War game. I remember $60. I'm like, I paid the $60. I got a good 10 hours, maybe 15 hours out of it. And that was a solid experience. Overall, fantastic. I really love those games. But nowadays, especially with Bethesda games, and I guess this has been around since Morrowind, so not really that recent, you can get hundreds of hours out of a full retail priced purchase. I don't want to pretend that DLC provides the same experience as a full game, but 10 hours worth of enjoyment for a $10 piece of DLC content that adds new ways to play the game is absolutely worth my time and money. And furthermore, since I don't think it's fair to compare the amount of time you can spend in a DLC to a full retail price purchase, I also don't think it's fair to argue that since you can spend, say, 200 hours in the base game, let's just be a little conservative because I've played more than double that, that $10 should buy you another 30 to 40 hours, that it should somehow be proportionate there. I don't think that's a fair argument to make because the base game lays the foundation for the DLC. So without the game, you don't have the DLC. So I don't believe it's fair, a fair trade unless it's a massive expansion like you get from an MMO or some kind of game like that, and this is not an MMO. Another angle you can take this value conversation at is comparing it to previous DLC from previous Bethesda games. So let's go back to Fallout 3 DLC and discuss how much that was. So each piece of Fallout 3 content was $10 on release, but they came out in 2009, the year after it came out. Well, not a full year, but a few months after, and all of them came out within a year. It was really, really awesome. They were $10 each. And if we're comparing the amount of content and amount of time you could spend in those DLCs compared to what we got with AUTOMATRON, I'm going to be completely honest, there was more value in those DLCs in my opinion. Maybe it's just the nostalgia I have for those DLCs, but each one provided more time, and I think it was more interesting than AUTOMATRON is currently in this game. What those, DLC packs did not offer is something like a robot workbench, something that truly adds a new way to play the game and experience all of the content that you already gotten. I mean, you could say maybe some of the perks, maybe some of the weapons and armor, but we get both of those things with this DLC. We also get the robot workbench. So it's kind of a similar conversation, maybe a little bit apples and oranges, but it's interesting to see how much Bethesda was charging for their DLC. And also you can make the argument that I completely agree with, is that those $10 DLCs were a lot more story driven, and they were, and they told some, once again, very interesting stories. And so if you were looking for that out of Automatron, I actually don't think you get that, and maybe that's not worth your $10. But again, if that robot workbench is something you're interested in and you're willing to fully explore it, then I think you do get your money's worth. It's also important to realize that the 5 pieces of content that came out for Fallout 3 all came out in 2009. That is 7 years ago. That's midway through the previous console generation with the Xbox 360 and the PS3. From where I stand, it seems like companies are charging more for a similar or the same amount of content. They're just charging more money because they can get it. You know, people are willing to pay that amount of money, and that's just how, you know, the industry is going right now. I'm not saying that gives Bethesda a free pass, but they are going along with the industry, in my opinion, and charging a little bit more for, you know, maybe a similar amount of content. It really is more of a, you know, comparison conversation, probably more that we can get into in this video. But also, if you look at Skyrim, also a game developed and released by Bethesda in 2011, all of their DLC for that game came out in 2012, and they released their larger chunks at $20 each. And I think those were more along the lines of Fallout 3 DLC, kind of story-based content with some new weapons, maybe some new abilities, turning into a werewolf, you know, stuff like that. Or maybe it wasn't turning into a werewolf, it was turning into a vampire, that's right. And also they had a $5 DLC in Hearthstone, which maybe we can, or not Hearthstone, sorry, Hearthfire. Hearthstone, I got Blizzard on the brain. Hearthfire, you could build your own houses, and, you know, maybe that's going to be similar to, you know, the amount of content we're going to get out of Wasteland Workshop. That's probably a comparison video I'll make in the near future here, since we're, you know, coming close to the next DLC. And I also believe it's relevant to pull in different games that Bethesda hasn't even developed to see what their pricing strategies are and, you know, their DLC content offerings for how much they're charging, because Bethesda operates in this market, in this industry with games and DLC. So they're definitely looking at the competition. I'm sure that definitely is a factor in how much they're pricing their stuff. One final point I wanted to bring up is that I didn't really talk about the season pass and how that's, you know, factored into the value. But if you got the $30 season pass, this is definitely, you know, you're not paying nearly as much as someone who's buying the standalone or someone who bought the season pass after March 1 and had to pay $50. I made a screw up on my part and bought the season pass on my Xbox when I full well and know that I both record and play now on my PC. So I'm one of those people that had to pay $50 for this season pass. When it's all said and done, you know, we don't know what the full value of the DLC and the season pass is going to be because they haven't announced all of that. And I do have a problem with that. And Bethesda's not the only company that does this, but I do have a problem with selling a season pass with DLC and not outlining exactly what the content is and exactly what people should expect and why they should spend their money for it. I do realize that I still paid the money up front and I'm part of the problem, but, you know, this is my job, this is my business. But for some of you more prudent, you know, consumers, think about that. Think about, you know, your money and purchasing a DLC. Maybe you love the game and that's still worth your money, but if, you know, you're on the fence, don't buy a season pass if you don't know exactly what's in it. Bethesda kind of put people in a precarious position, you know, having those season passes only cost $30 and then increasing it. And I've already talked about that, so I'm not going to go down that road again. But I'd like to hear from you guys. After watching this video, if you don't have the DLC, does it sound like it's worth your money? From my description, would you spend $5 or $10 US or whatever your regional equivalent is on this DLC? Or if you've already bought the DLC and played it, was it worth your money? Share all of that in the comment section below. Alright guys, today I shared my opinions on the value of the Automatron DLC for Fallout 4, and next time we will cover more Fallout on my channel, so stay tuned for Fallout 4 tips and tricks videos. If you learned something new, remember to hit that like button, I would really appreciate it, and don't forget to subscribe for more Automatron DLC coverage, robot building guides, and general tips and tricks videos. Talk to you guys next time, peace.